Hello, and welcome to American Pilgrims National event. Today, we are going to hear from Bratsch-Prince, who is one of our coordinators and the Iowa chapter, and she is talking about Spanish culture for pilgrims, everyday cultural norms. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Dawn, and we are really grateful for your time. And those of you who are here listening, we're grateful for you as well.
Terrific. Let me share my screen. Okay, can everyone see? Screen is visible?
Yes.
Great. Okay, super. Well, thank you everybody for being here on this Saturday morning. This session will focus on Spanish culture for pilgrims, really what everyone should know before you go on your pilgrim's journey on the Camino. And I've walked several Caminos, the Frances, of course, and multiple other smaller Caminos. And I've had the experience of traveling with friends who've never been to Spain before, spoke no Spanish whatsoever, and really had very little understanding of what to expect. So today I want to talk with you about some general cultural norms in Spain that are distinct from American ways of doing things. Let me give you a very brief introduction to who I am and my long relationship with Spain, a country that I love dearly. In my junior year of high school, so this is back in the 1970s, our Spanish class traveled to Spain for a 10-day immersive experience. And that experience forever changed my life and the way I saw life. The sights and sounds and smells, as well as the language and the different ways of doing things were really a shock to me as a young person. I had not been prepared to enter a world where everything was so different. And I grew up in New York City. So I grew up in a city where there was a lot of diversity, and yet going to Spain was just a really life-changing, awareness-raising experience for me. Um, so while that was my reaction as a teenage girl many decades ago, today we can still all be taken aback or confused when we travel somewhere that operates so very differently from our own country or our own community. I have since studied Spanish, lived in Spain, walked several Caminos, and my more recent experience on the Camino with good friends and travelers who were unfamiliar with Spain really informs this presentation. I try not to lecture my friends when I'm walking the Camino with them, and they try not to protest too much my cringing looks that I give them when they make a misstep. So this isn't a research presentation. This is really a presentation based on experience. So what are cultural norms? These are the standards we live by, and I just share this brief quote so that we all have a common understanding. They're the shared expectations and rules that guide the behavior of people within social groups. And so we're going to talk today a little about the norms in Spain. Some of you are preparing for your first pilgrimage in Spain. Others are veteran pilgrims, have walked some, many, one Camino. So I just ask you perhaps to pop into the chat, what cultural norm or norms surprised you most when you first visited Spain? And we'll have an opportunity to share at the end as well.
I'll speak first. I know that my husband and I, we were on the Camino Portuguese, and the lateness of the start of the day, we were there in the fall, and of course we were up and ready to go to have breakfast and coffee. And sadly, we'd walk out the door and it was radio silence. Like there was very little activity, nothing was open. We had to wait for a while before we could eat. We had to walk for an hour or so before we could find coffee and something to eat. So that took several days to adjust our digestive system to that.
So I think you touch upon a number of items that we'll look at in this presentation. So thank you. Meal times, just activity times during the day, hours of business, all of those are, I hope to touch upon in this presentation. Allison, was there anything else that came through the chat?
Some people talked about the ghost time, so when things are closed for
Yes.
siesta in the latter part of the day. There are eating so late at night. So it sounds like time differences. People are talking about the cultural differences there.
Okay, well, I'm gonna keep going here, and we'll have time at the end. I really like to hear from all of you, but I also want to make sure I touch upon the topics. So these are the 10 cultural topics that I've picked out that I think when I kind of prep friends and other groups to go to Spain, these are the things that I think are important. So there are 10 cultural topics that I think every pilgrim should be aware of as they travel to Spain. It will help you navigate more effectively your Camino journey. Understanding practices of daily life, meal times, modes of greeting, politeness, customer service, etc. And I think that the hospitaleros, restaurant staff, taxi drivers, shopkeepers, the people that you meet on the street in the towns will expect not fluency in Spanish for sure, but some basic understanding of your part on kind of the rhythm of the day and the rhythm of life. So these are the 10 topics, and we will start going through them. So the number one is Spain in the world, as I call it. And basically, Spain is a modern European country with a long and unique history. I love Spanish history, but I will not lecture here on Spanish history. Just to be aware that some people think they're going, when they go on the Camino, that they're going somewhere where resources are scarce or conveniences that we're accustomed to are not available. And Spain is a modern country that has all the modern conveniences you might expect: grocery stores, shops, restaurants, transportation, excellent public transportation, healthcare access, etc. There are small towns, large towns, rural and urban spaces. The same differences you would find in the US, and the water is safe to drink. Spanish history goes back millennia, and just a few names to remember, because as you walk along the Camino, you're walking through Spanish history. The Iberians were the prehistoric peoples that settled in Spain, and you'll see references in a moment to some of the things that the Iberians left. Then we had Celtic people, or the Celtic people, with a very strong presence in Galicia, and the connection between those people and the, say, British, Irish, the Celtic nations of the United Kingdom is real. The Romans followed and occupied much of Spain and brought Christianity to the peninsula. And you may not be aware of it, but there are many Roman remnants, ruins, sites throughout Spain. And some of the Camino traverses the Roman roads that were built many centuries ago. The Germanic tribes arrived in the 5th century, and they established their rule in Spain. And then came the Arabs and the North African Berbers in the 8th century. They brought Islam and Arab culture to Spain. And you will see this, what we call Moorish influence in architecture and other styles, tiles. You'll see that in the southern parts of Spain if you walk the Via de la Plata Camino. The modern era of Spain, let's say it began approximately 1492 with the unification of various kingdoms in Spain, and then the modern royal dynasties, a period of dictatorship, 1939 to 1975, and then the current democracy. So be aware of all of that history that you're walking through as you traverse Spain. And here's the map of Spain, and you will walk through Navarra, La Rioja, Castilla y León, and potentially parts of Asturias, maybe not on the Frances, and Galicia, depending on the Camino that you walk, but most of us who walk the Camino Frances will walk along those northern provinces of Spain. But know that there's 17, call them provinces or autonomous communities, And there's 2 autonomous cities that belong to Spain on the northern coast of Africa, 2 cities, Ceuta and Melilla. So Spain is, you know, a modern, complicated, like most modern countries, nation, and you just need to be aware of all that's going on. I like to point out to pilgrims that Spain has been called many things across the centuries. It's been called Iberia, it's been called Hispania, Spain, it's been called Sepharad, and it's been called Al-Andalus. And each one of these names reflects a different cultural contribution. Iberia comes from the prehistoric people, the Iberians. Hispania is the name that the Romans gave to Spain. Sepharad is the name that the Jewish population used to call the place that they lived. And Al-Andalus is a term that comes from Arabic and refers to Muslim Spain from the Middle Ages and up to the modern era. So lots of cultural heritage, very, very rich. So now connected to that is the linguistic diversity. There are many languages, regional languages used across the peninsula, and I'm sure the veteran pilgrims here today have been aware of that. As you're walking along the French Camino, the Camino Frances, you will see signs in Basque, in certain parts of Navarra and the País Vasco and La Rioja. Their language in Basque is called Euskara. You will potentially hear Catalan if you walk on one of the other Caminos, the Caminos that come out of Barcelona or Valencia. These are different languages. These aren't dialects of Spanish. So be very, very careful how you refer to languages. Dialects by some is interpreted as a lesser kind of language. So just know that language is politicized as well. Castilian is what we refer to as Spanish, Castellano. Galician or Gallego is what you will hear in and around Santiago de Compostela in the province of Galicia. And of course, if you're walking the Portuguese Camino, you will hear Portuguese. And these are languages with history. Some of them were outlawed during the Franco period, the period of dictatorship. So people take great pride in being able to utilize these languages. And you'll see street signs, menus, lots of signs in Santiago de Compostela, even in Galician. So awareness of this, I think, is what I advise. So greetings and politeness. I would say Spaniards have a fairly direct communication style, maybe more so than most of us in, say, the rural United States. So I live in Iowa. People talk about Iowa nice or Minnesota nice, Midwestern nice, where people tend to couch everything in maybe tentative or very polite diplomatic terms. And I would say Spaniards tend to speak very openly and in a lively, communicative way. And I believe they appreciate when we also are direct in our communication. They'll offer honest answers to sincere questions. They speak very clearly about their point of view. And I believe in my interactions, they expect honesty from the people that they speak with. One might say, or at least the folks that I've walked with notice that communication in Spain is maybe a little bit louder than we're accustomed to. I don't know that Spaniards are particularly comfortable with silence in social situations. So it's acceptable for people to speak over each other and interrupt each other in excited conversation. And as I said, that's maybe not always the norm in vast parts of the US. So what you might perceive as shouting or loud anger really is full engagement with conversation. In Spain, there's also less emphasis on keeping physical distance, and touch is a normal part of expression and conversation. I work at a state university, and so I'm keenly aware of our norms to, keep physical space, keep doors open when you're having one-on-one conversations. and not having a lot of physical touch with others. And I think that's part of our cultural norm today. So in Spain, it's common to see friends walking arm in arm, women walking arm in arm, men walking with their arms around each other. People may touch your arm when they're talking to you. They get very close, closer to each other and to people that they're speaking with than most Americans do. These interactions are meant to signify, friendship, approachability, confidence in the other person. And I think it's a notable difference from US culture. Particularly, we tend to have a bigger kind of space bubble around us. And my experience is that Spaniards will get closer to you to talk to you. And so being aware of that, and understanding where it comes from is very important. Greetings. Sorry, there's so many words on this slide, but as a visitor, your interactions with those you meet along the Camino should always begin with politeness, because as a pilgrim, you're there in this country. You need to be above all, let's say, grateful, polite. In Spain, in everyday life, the typical casual greeting involves kissing each cheek, starting with the left cheek. And this is a form of greeting that's pretty common among women, or when a man greets a woman. And men typically greet each other by shaking hands, but they can also kiss each other on the cheek. And we recently at an American Pilgrims gathering had 3 colleagues from Spain visiting from Estella, one of the towns along the Camino, and they greeted people by the traditional kissing on the cheek. So evidence that this is the cultural norm. Saying buenos dias, buenas tardes, good day, good afternoon, or buenas noches, good evening, are common greetings. A more casual greeting might be hola or ¿qué tal? And remember, H is silent in Spanish, so it's hola. And saying adios, or the very kind of colloquial ciao, is appropriate. Of course, as pilgrims, our common greeting to folks is typically buen camino. But if you're in a city or in a town and not interacting with pilgrims, just remember these greetings. One thing to just call out, I traveled once to Spain with a group of college students, and I noticed that they were incredibly friendly to everybody that they met. They greeted everybody with a exuberant, have a good day, ten buen dia, tenga un buen dia. Asked waiters and others in different establishments how they were doing, how their day was going. And that seemed to be perceived as overly friendly and almost aggressive. My interpretation is it appeared or was taken as superficial Americanism. And so I had to coach my students on kind of reading the cues that folks are giving you, and being polite but not being overly effusive in the words that they use to greet people, especially in restaurants, etc. So time. So this is my sense is that Spaniards prioritize time, and they prioritize time with family and friends, and social engagements. You'll see people in the streets, sitting on park benches, sitting in cafes, sitting in plazas, all hours of the day and in the night. They don't worship, in my opinion, they don't worship busyness as most Americans do. They really do enjoy social interaction with friends and with family. Again, my impression is they're not obsessed with making money at all costs to the detriment of relationships. And one might say that they have a healthier work-life balance or work-life boundary. You may have heard individuals say that Spaniards work to live, while Americans live to work. And the students that I've traveled to with Spain and others that I've traveled with have expressed, have kind of confirmed that impression. So that is important to note, that family and friends are important, and punctuality is not a priority. Punctuality at work, in a very strict work setting, is clearly aspired to and abided by, but punctuality in social settings is not a priority. You might invite people to come over at 7 p.m., which is kind of early, but they might not arrive until 7:45. In the United States, most folks would have a fit if your guest didn't arrive, within 5-10 minutes of the starting time. But in Spain, this is not uncommon. And again, I think it is, just the punctuality is not the priority. It's the quality of the time that you spend with people. For some Americans, the lack of focus on punctuality is very, very frustrating. But if you are going to have a pleasurable experience, a happy experience in Spain, you need to get on board with the way their daily life operates. So keeping with this topic of time are the daily work hours. And these have changed dramatically, I would say, since I first arrived in Spain, where everything was closed. All businesses were closed between, say, 1:30 and 3:30 every day. And today, that is not that's not the universal standard. So the typical day starts later, as one of our pilgrim participants mentioned, and it ends much later in Spain than it does in the United States. You can be out and about at midnight or even 1 a.m. in a large city. This happened to me in Valencia. And I saw families, children, grandparents, friends just socializing out in a cafe like the one you see here on the slide. Basically when we would be long in bed. So the day does extend much later than it does in the States. For those of you that are interested, these are what I would call the business hours, Monday through Friday. Shops open around 9:30, close between 2 and 5-ish for what people call la siesta, but is really lunch hour. People go home, schools close. And then businesses open back up 5-ish to about 8:30 or 9. And Saturday, many places are open 10 until 2, and so closed in the evening. Cafes, cafeterias, bars are generally open early for breakfast and stay open until late at night. I noticed that cafeterias that are in towns that really cater to pilgrims may even be open as early as 6 a.m. to cater to that early morning pilgrim crowd that's looking for coffee and some type of breakfast. So, you have to pay attention to the towns that you're on. Restaurants do not serve food. Nice restaurants, formal restaurants, do not serve food from 4 till about 8:30 p.m. Again, in towns that really cater to pilgrims, there will be many pilgrim establishments, cafes, bars that will have food available to pilgrims who want to eat at our traditional dinner time of 5 or 6 p.m. But I can tell you from experience on some of the less traveled Caminos where there are not as many pilgrims, that between 4 and 8:30, if you don't have some food on in your backpack, or go to maybe a grocery store, you're unlikely to get a meal served to you because the kitchen is closed. I love the 24-hour clock. I think it avoids a lot of ambiguity, and I've adapted it for my own life, much to the dismay of my family. But in Spain, you will see times posted on the 24-hour, or I think we call it the military clock. So familiarize yourself with that. You see public digital clocks will have the 24 hours, as will train stations, bus stations. And this avoids the AM, PM ambiguity. So you want to study up on that so that you're not lost with with regard to time. And meal times. So for all of the decades that I've been going and coming from Spain, still don't quite have all of the meal times down. Traditional Spanish meal times are strictly adhered to, and they do not align with US norms. So desayuno is your breakfast. You usually have that when you wake up. In Spain, it typically includes either toast, tostada, or a pastry, a bollo, croissant, jam, and coffee and orange juice. Bacon, eggs, heavy breakfast that a lot of folks in the US eat is not served at that desayuno. Most pilgrims will talk about second breakfast, which is not part of the Spanish culture, it's part of pilgrim culture, where people will walk, 3-4 miles and down the road, get some maybe more substantial food, lunch-like food for the journey. So desayuno, when you wake up, la comida is the main meal of the day in Spain. And again, 1:30 to 3:30-ish, 1:30 to 4. You'll see in most of the towns, people out eating this substantial meal with multiple courses, maybe some wine, maybe a beer, but that's when people take their primary food. And it's also a social event. Merienda just means snack, and people have snacks, or they'll go have tapas, 6-7 p.m. something, because dinner, la cena, is the evening meal, and that doesn't occur till typically 8:30, the earliest 9, up until 11 p.m. So you want to make sure, if you're walking every day as a pilgrim, you want to make sure you figure out when you're going to arrive in a town, so that you are not arriving when everything's shut for food, because you need that nourishment to continue to walk. I love this map. Someone shared this with me. When is dinner in Europe? And you see all the different dinner times. And Spain has the latest traditional dinner time, evening meal. So 9:30 to 10:30 p.m. is average. So again, most pilgrims are in bed by 10. So you really want to have that main meal of the day earlier, and you want to plan ahead. And if you need something really substantial right away in the morning, some protein, you'll want to do some shopping the night before, and you want to make sure you have something with you or in your backpack right away in the morning, because the likelihood of places being open at 6 and providing a substantial breakfast is not very likely. Okay, and then cuisine. Spanish cuisine varies by region, which is delightful. You can walk along the Camino Frances, and you're walking through so many different regions, and you can try and experiment with so many different types of food. But there's plenty of seafood, beef and pork. It is not the same as Latin American cuisine. Many first timers in Spain are looking for the rice and beans, the flour, corn tortillas, and spicy foods. And Spanish cuisine is rich and it's varied, but it is not the same as Latin American cuisine. There's also not the same tendency to pour salt, pepper, and ketchup on everything. So, you have to get used to the different styles of food. I know that folks that like really spicy food, I have friends that take sriracha sauce and other types of hot sauce with them in little packets in their backpack. But I advise you to enjoy and try all the different Spanish foods that there are. In Spain, there are many bars, often many along a busy street. The bars are like British or Irish pubs. You can get a drink, a cafe, a caña, an Aquarius, which is sort of like Gatorade, or often a breakfast, a menú del día, the daily special, or a plato combinado, a plate that comes with a dish that comes with, some bread, some green vegetables, some meat, some potatoes. A staple of Spanish culture is the tradition of tapas, which are small plates and which are now very popular in the United States. So in Spain, when you get a drink in a bar, whether it's an alcoholic beverage or not, they'll typically give you a little teeny dish with some olives or some potato chips or a little ensaladilla rusa or small fish, boquerones. Just something bite so that you can taste what they're making there. It's a good way to taste different types of foods without ordering a portion. But tapas, friends go out and have tapas. They order various types of foods that are on display in the cafeterias, and they share them and try them. So that is a typical way to go out in the evening. And you see pilgrims doing that as well, ordering a variety of different small plates and then sharing them. Customer service is not the same in Spain as in the United States. Customer service expectations are limited. And in the United States, there's very high expectations, and I think sometimes rigid expectations for customer service. And those are not the same in Spain. In Spain, the customer is not always right. And I've encountered this myself, and I've seen fellow Americans, pilgrims, get frustrated by by servers that are not super attentive. So let's talk about eating out in Spain. And I really like this quote, because eating out in Spain can be a real challenge. Food is wonderful, many places to eat, but to read this, do I sit or should I stand? Shall I wave or could I shout? And am I supposed to leave a tip? In Spain, there are often no hostesses to guide you to the correct table, no astutely attentive waiters to tend to your every need, and no universal rule on tipping. This is the wild, wild west of restaurants, and only the strong survive. And I say this only slightly jokingly, because when you do walk into an eating establishment in Spain, unless it's a very upscale, fancy restaurant where, of course, there will be a hostess and they're very attentive to clients. It's a challenge to try to figure out, should you sit down, walk in and sit down? Do you stand there? Will someone come over to you and usher you to a seat? So once you figured out when to eat, the time, and what to order, the kind of the food, the only thing left to figure out is how to order. If you're in a tapas bar or cafeteria with just a few tables along a wall, you can usually walk in and take a seat. If you're in a crowded patio bar with tables outside, maybe you can take a seat. If there's no wait list, you can sit yourself. You might wait for a waiter to come by, but if you wait too long, someone else might grab that table. So as I said, after decades of traveling to and from Spain, I'm still not 100% accurate accurate about how to get the attention of a waiter and be served. The bars and restaurants often have few waiters, and one person often takes care of more than, say, 10 tables at a time. They're amazingly busy, amazingly efficient. Any of you who've been in Spain can attest to that. They will eventually bring you food, but they will almost never bring you the check unless you ask for it. Delivering an unsolicited check or bill to a table is kind of rude. It's like they're trying to push you out. And someone told me that once you sit down at a table at a bar, a cafe, you're not, you don't have a 45-minute time limit like you might have in the States. You basically are there until you choose to leave. So they don't rush you. Hence, they don't deliver the bill to your table. Getting up and going to the counter and slapping down your bill on a bunch of cash is not the norm either. So a good waiter in Spain will leave you alone until you specifically call him or her over to the table. And getting their attention can be tricky. So you want to ask for the bill. It's common to catch a waiter's eye or gesture with your hand. and they will eventually come over, but getting up and going, there's usually no checkout area. So it is the Wild West of eating out, and it's an adventure. Now, tipping is a very different custom in Spain. It's not expected in most situations. In the US, tipping for services in a restaurant, a taxi is an expectation, and you might even say a requirement. That's because those service workers in the state earn a minimum pay that is lower than the national average. And in Spain, that is not the same. Service workers don't earn less than the minimum wage. And tipping, therefore, is not an expectation, and it's certainly not a requirement. But for those of us who are used to the practice of tipping, not doing so is extremely difficult. And I say this from my own experience. Walking out of a restaurant and not leaving something on the table is almost impossible for me to do. And I know that it's not an expectation. So I've learned that an easy practice is to maybe round up to the nearest euro on a bill in a cafe or a bar. Or if the service is truly exceptional, you could leave up to 10%. If you're with a big group, the establishment might already add a service charge to your bill. So look it over for that, so that you're not adding a tip when it's already been charged to you. Notice too that in Spain, cash is used more than in the US. I would say this was certainly true pre-pandemic. Since the pandemic, touchless pay, even in albergues, is more common. But I would advise you very strongly to always be prepared with some cash, especially in smaller towns and smaller cities. My own practice is to, withdraw a certain amount of euros and then use that for, a good number of days or weeks, so that I always have cash on hand just in case. So tipping is not required. And my last point here, I think I'm within time, is farmacias. This is a Spanish phenomenon, in my opinion, and a real boon to pilgrims. So farmacias, or pharmacies, are everywhere. They're ubiquitous, and pharmacists do provide very valuable medical guidance. Many pilgrims find that Spanish pharmacies are a godsend. If you need any type of medicine or drug like ibuprofen, you'll have to go to a pharmacy to get it, because practically anything stronger than soap or toothpaste is sold in stores with the green crosses out front. That's how you know it's a pharmacy. It'll have usually a lighted green cross. In most places, pharmacies are plentiful, and some of them in the larger towns, a certain number have to be open 24 hours a day. The pharmacies are not like, CVS in the US. They're strictly for medication, some hygiene and beauty and baby products. But if you have a problem, an ailment that you want to keep private, but you want to figure out what you need, prepare yourself for a few minutes of uncomfortable conversation with your pharmacist, because every single health and wellness product that you need is really kept behind the counter. The pharmacists, and I can attest to this from firsthand experience, they provide highly valuable medical advice. They are trained. You might want to go in and grab and go, as we're accustomed to doing, but the pharmacists are very helpful. They're very knowledgeable. They can take the time, and they will take the time to listen to what you need, explain differences, and maybe ibuprofen here and ibuprofen doses there. They'll answer the questions you may have, and they may ask you questions. In the cities that are larger, they will have some knowledge of English as well. The pharmacies are low cost as well. And you'll be surprised at some of the prescriptions that you can get over the counter in Spain that you can't get over the counter in the United States. My own experience has been with, issues I've had walking the Camino, foot problems, rashes, going into a pharmacy, answering their questions, sharing with them what my issue is, and they are have always been right on point, advising and providing a recommendation on medication. Clearly, if it's something more serious, they will advise you to see a doctor, but pilgrims in particular should be very aware that pharmacies in Spain operate very differently than they do in the States and are really a benefit of going to American pilgrims, to all pilgrims. So those are my tips. And as I said, this is based on my experience walking with Americans and just noticing confusion, questions that they might have about life in Spain. So I wanted to ask those of you who have walked the Camino, what cultural advice might you offer a pilgrim embarking on their first Camino in Spain? Something that complements perhaps some of the topics that I've highlighted today. Then Allison, I'll let me know if there's anything in the chat or anybody with their hand raised.
We've got Donna with her hand raised.
There, I can unmute. I found through Spain and through when I went through Portugal and really every country that I visit is kind of how we would want to be treated. And that's speak kindly and listen and be polite and be and don't be loud. I found one thing that I felt on the Camino, especially after being there for maybe 3 weeks, and then then more Americans would be there, you realize how loud we can be, which is part of who we are. But I would say be polite and lower your voice.
Yeah,
Thank you, Paula.
Hello, everyone. So when the first year I was an hospitalero, I worked with a woman from Spain, she's Catalan, and she taught me so much about the culture. I am still to this day friends with her and very thankful for all the really sound good advice she gave me. And the thing I remember the most, and I'm very cognizant of it, is when you walk into a business and you need something. You don't just walk in and say, I need or I want. The expectation is that you will greet them. Buenos dias, señora or señorita or señor, and wait for them to respond to you and have, if you know enough words. I don't know a lot, but thank you, Kelly Bates, for helping me learn some. So to try to have that little conversation first and then say, what you need, necesito, whatever it is you're looking for. They are so appreciative of it. I got so much further with that. And like you said, Donna, the kindness, they're very, very kind to us. Even when people are rude to them, they don't lose their kindness.
Thank you, Paula. There's a couple in the chat, Dawn. We had don't insist on your own cultural norms, and also trying to learn a little bit of Spanish before you go.
Yes.
Be open to the kindness and appreciating that you're attempting to speak Spanish, even if it may not be great, but you're trying. And so those are some of the comments that we had from folks in the chat.
Sure. I mean, I think it's impractical for folks to think they can become fluent in Spanish, in the 6 weeks before they're going on the Camino, but being polite. So I think everyone has just kind of reiterated that, being polite, and then making some effort to learn key words, really smooths the conversation and the relationship with Spaniards.
Are you ready for questions?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay. We had one in the chat. Any cultural advice for women traveling solo?
Well, I mean, I think in general, women always need to be attentive, and trust your gut. And that would be for Spain and really for for anywhere. So I grew up in New York City, as I mentioned. I grew up in a big city, and so I have certain practices that I will always utilize as I'm navigating, the world, cities, towns. Certainly in larger cities, being more attentive, but in smaller towns too. We talked about uh, space, physical space. And so in Spanish culture, people do get closer to you than what most Americans are comfortable with. And that does not always mean that someone is trying to, invade you. But so keeping that in mind, but really trusting your gut. If something feels strange with regard to other people, whether they're pilgrims or Spaniards, my advice is just trust your gut. In larger cities, if you can travel with another companion. Many of us start out alone, and it's happened in every Camino I've walked. You end up with friends. And that's very helpful as you navigate, long distances. So I just say be aware of your surroundings, of people, and trust your own instincts as you're walking.
Thanks, Dawn. We also had Julie in the chat said that sometimes when you're offered something and you say, "Oh no, no, thank you," the person insists, and so maybe the cultural tip here is to say yes when you can. So it just makes the giver feel good, I guess.
Yeah,
Kelly, I saw your hand. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, especially with food, rejecting the offering of food can be viewed as a rejecting of the person, of their hospitality. So that's a good point.
Yeah. I just saw another comment in the chat. Smoking is very common. So particularly where I live, that's not super common where I am anymore. Kelly, I saw your hand up.
Thanks so much, Allison. And Paula, thank you. That really tickled me, your comment. So I do teach a Spanish for Pilgrims on the Camino class, which we're actually right in the middle of a 4-week program right now. And coming up to the topic of pharmacies and dealing with pharmacists. Dawn, could you give any suggestions on vocabulary phrases that you think that would be best for me to teach these pilgrims for survival in a pharmacy?
I would think so. What usually pilgrims go into the pharmacy for looking for something related to feet, right? Usually care of feet. So maybe some body part vocabulary. The typical, even tengo dolor de, that type of vocabulary, but body parts. Maybe some vocabulary describing. I know when I had to go in, I had to describe a rash that I had on my ankles, which is, I guess, very common with pilgrims, but basic words for, I would say that I would focus on the typical things that affect pilgrims. So, feet, headaches, sunscreen. A lot of people will go into pharmacies for sunscreen. So that kind of vocabulary. My experience is in many of the pharmacies, the pharmacists know enough English to be helpful to pilgrims who typically have that as the common kind of language.
Great, thank you. Gracias.
Anthony, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to add about the greeting someone when you go into a shop or a cafe. What I found people were very receptive. I go into a cafe to get coffee or tortilla, whatever, and I always bring the dishes, the dirty dishes from my table back up to the bar. And it seems that the bar tender really appreciates this, universally appreciates this.
That's a great tip and a great strategy to kind of forge that bond and with the servers. And so you've been there, they're incredibly busy. There's no orderly line typically to ask for something. It's just a lot of busyness in bars and cafeterias. So I think that's a brilliant idea.
So I mean, if the place is busy, you know, I'm freeing up the table, but even if it's not busy, I always do this just as a small courtesy.
Yeah.
You know, the tipping culture is not in Spain, thank goodness. I can't stand it here in America, but this is a way I can show my appreciation for the service.
Great tip. Thank you for sharing that.
Dawn, we had a question in the chat about using trains. Can you talk about any suggestions that you have?
About using trains, the public transportation in Spain is incredible and effective. I typically, I guess I'm not 100% sure where what to share, but I find that the websites for the trains for Renfe is very, they have an English version, they have a Spanish version, obviously. And you can get most information if you can read that 24-hour clock. So I underscore that, understanding that. You can typically find the information you need for traveling by train. The trains are very comfortable, they're very clean, they typically have restrooms, not fancy restrooms, but they have facilities on the train. You can typically get food, and people don't typically bother you if you're on one of the long distance or even the shorter distance trains. They're a very effective and really a very reasonably priced way to get around Spain. You might have to, depending on where you're going to, take a combination of train and bus. One app that I always start with is Rome to Rio. It's a great app that if you plug in where you're starting and where you want to get to, will help guide you to the different ways that you can travel from place to place, whether it's train, bus, taxi, car, plane. And I've used that very successfully. But the train system is very efficient, timely. I think it's safe and definitely worth exploring.
And along those same lines, somebody said, are taxis and buses common on the Frances between the smaller villages?
Usually if you I think along the Frances there's probably a bus. So if you go onto that Rome to Rio and look, you would be able to see what what goes from town to town, which line of bus. And Alsa is the bus company that's really has the biggest share of routes in Spain. Taxis, I would think, on many parts of the Camino are accessible. Usually the albergues will have, a taxi phone number, a teletaxi phone number that you can call or that they can call for you. I know I've walked some Caminos where on trees they've posted in plastic, in a plastic folder, the name and number of a taxi service, recognizing that pilgrims may need help. Some of the parts of the Camino are through trails and over rocks, and I don't think those are spaces where taxis go, but certainly you could find taxi service from town to town if you needed it. And so the albergues or the hostels or the hotels, wherever you're staying, those are places where you could get guidance before you start out on your journey for a day.
I'll say on the Norte and Primitivo, the taxi phone numbers and cards were directly related to the hill you had to climb that day. So I just want to tell you guys that if you're interested in those routes. Kathleen, you have been very patient. You are up next.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I I wanted to say a lot of my friends don't eat bread. And so they went to the restaurant and they said no bread, but they were charged for bread. And I just want to say that I think that the bread charge is the tip for the waiter. And so even if you don't want bread, they charge you for bread, and you should want to pay it because they want a tip, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah. So the other thing is, I recommend that you ask the cab driver how much that will be so they can estimate it for you, because when you get there, they can charge you whatever they want. And I found that I was charged quite a bit when I didn't ask ahead of time.
That's an excellent piece of advice, asking ahead of time. Some of them will have the meters, but not all taxis have meters. And I know it was on the Camino San Andres last year, and it was a flat rate to get from X town to whatever the other town was. So, but having an understanding whether it's a metered taxi or whether it's a flat rate or how they're going to calculate it, that's an excellent point.
Paula?
Yes, this is about buses on the Frances. This happened, and it's been several years ago. It was 2015 on the Frances, but a friend or a pilgrim that I met that I was trying to help with an injury needed to take the bus, and I believe it was in Redecia, and we needed to get to Burgos where she could get, some larger medical help, and we just went to the little bus stop thing and read, and it told us what time the bus would be there. And we were fortunate. It wasn't going to be too long. And so we just stood and waited or sat and waited and then got on the bus and paid as we got on. We didn't have to have a ticket. And I found that so often, especially in those, those local buses in the smaller towns and stuff. So, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'm seeing, there's a couple questions about pack transfer companies in here. And so do you want to talk anything about that, Dawn, and options for that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's many different companies that have gotten into the business of pack transport. I think there's Pack Mochila on the Frances, the Spanish Correos, the mail service also offers pack transfer from town to town along the Frances. I walked the Portuguese coastal route a number of years ago, and there was a service that was dedicated to that Portuguese route. And that service you had to reserve, submit your information digitally and print out a sticker for your pack. It was like high tech, which is not always helpful if you're staying in an albergue and you don't have access to a printer. So I thought that was an interesting approach. But I think along the Frances, you can transfer your packs in different ways. It used to be that you could just tell the albergue, the hospitalero at the albergue that you were interested in having your pack transported, and they would help you identify the company that most people use and how much it costs. I think they're becoming more automated and maybe even efficient. I've heard nobody ever talk about getting their pack lost or stolen, so it's really quite safe. And for people who need to have their pack transported ahead, that's fine. There's no shame in that. You do need to know where they're supposed to leave it off. So you really have to have a room reserved in some type of lodging. They're not going to leave it at a bar or restaurant or just leave it at an albergue that you're not staying at. And I saw some pilgrims have challenges with that. So you have to plan ahead if you're going to use one of those services. But there are multiple services, and people have preferences, but I think they're all fairly effective.
Thanks for that. The
And I wanna
chat is heating up, so I'm trying to get those questions and get to the folks out here. Donna, you are up next.
Real quick, back to the culture. I fell in love with the tapas culture, which is so different than we have here, but it was really a challenge to learn how that worked in the smaller places, that you would point to what you wanted, and then at the end, they would count the toothpicks, and that's what you got charged. And we just loved that, of course, once we learned that. But the tapas culture, very unique and very enjoyable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. And sorry, go ahead, Dawn.
No, I was just saying, paying attention to the regional differences, because there are differences from region to region. In Spain, what's a pincho, what's a tapa, what's a something else. And so observing, as Donna just shared, counting toothpicks or however the counting dishes, however they do it, but pay attention to those cues.
All right, Paula, you are going to be our last question.
Okay, so as to the backpack services,
Mhm.
many times if you're staying in an albergue or a pension even, they will already have tags for you.
Okay.
Speak to your hospitaleros or hospitaleras and ask them. I've always been able to provide those tags. So, okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. We are so grateful for everybody's time here, especially Dawn's for putting this together. We have lots of great information. Oh, great. We have lots of great information available at our website, which is americanpilgrims.org. And I do also want to say, if you are not connected to a local chapter, that is a wonderful way to get information, because what works for me may not work for you. The route that you're walking may not be one that I've walked. And so it's a great way to get lots of great information in one place. Thank you for your membership in American Pilgrims. This year, we were able to fund 22 grants, which is incredible. So we are really grateful. What you do matters. And we are forever looking at ways to give back to pilgrims who are walking this year and pilgrims who are walking in 50 years. So we are really grateful for you, and we wish you all a buen camino.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.